You've shared with me before that you invited him to go to Honduras, but to promote pro-life legislation. Why did you ask him, and what was the people's response, and who did he talk to when you were there?
Well, I had first met Dr. Nathanson after reading his book, Aborting America, which would have come out in 1979. And so shortly after that, I invited him to Washington, and I organized a seminar which was basically for Black Catholics and Hispanic immigrants at Catholic University, because I felt those populations were being targeted.
Which they still are.
Still are.
Indeed.
And so I wanted them to hear from Dr. Nathanson. And he came, he gave a very compelling presentation.
And I'd like to make a point here for our listeners. This is way before he became Catholic.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yes,
Way before.
Yeah. And, his conversion to the pro-life movement came out of his experience of the realization, this is a child. I can't do this anymore. And look at at the unborn baby and say, it's a matter of intellectual honesty. And so he made a complete about-face. And at that point, this book was trying to explain exactly how the abortion movement had gotten such
Like momentum
in the United States, certainly by exaggerating all these statistics and making up statistics and so forth. So I was very, very grateful for him to come to Washington and give that presentation. And then I had been involved with Nellie Gray in organizing pro-life marches. So I helped her in the first march, and I've been at every march since. And
okay, you said that so quickly. I just want everybody to catch on to this. No, the point I wanted to make right then was Cardinal O'Malley has never missed a March for Life, and we're getting ready to go in a couple weeks to celebrate the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But carry on, though, because you were telling us about the whole Honduras connection.
Well, that's an important part of it. So, as I say, Nellie Gray, right after the decision, decided to leave her job. She was a lawyer working for the government, and really dedicate her life to the pro-life cause. And the centerpiece of her work was the annual march in Washington. And so a group of us worked with her at the beginning, and she was just an extraordinary woman, a great woman of faith and energy. We'd have many late-night meetings at her house, and she'd serve us peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But every year I tried to take as many people to the march as possible. And at one point, a couple of my parishioners from Honduras who were in Washington studying, and they came to the march with me. And a lot of, particularly for the Latin Americans, when you invite them to the march, they'd be very nervous because they think of these political demonstrations in their own countries they'd experienced where cars are set on fire and the army comes and shoots everybody. So it was a hard sell at the beginning.
Peaceful march.
I always tell the story that the first year in my parish, I kept talking up the march. I said, it's going to be on this date, and I want everybody to meet here at the parish, and we'll have transportation provided. And so I rented the 4 buses, and I kept on saying to the people, you will be here, si padre, si padre. So the day of the march, we had the 4 buses there, and there was myself, the nun that worked with me, the deacon and his wife. And I said, well, there's a bus for each of us. I said, the bad news is we were going to charge everybody $5 for the transportation. I have no money to pay for these buses.
Oh gosh.
The bus drivers were not happy.
Really?
So, but
Nobody showed
my
up?
father bailed me out. So the next week, I went storming in and saying, "What happened?" And as I tell people, that's when I came to realize that "si padre" does not mean yes.
Oh.
And when they explained to me, their fear of these demonstrations because of what, when you're going to a manifestación and they think of, so we got them over that hurdle. The next year, we
okay.
filled the buses.
Okay.
But eventually,
That's a great story.
Some of these very extraordinary people that became very involved in the pro-life movement as a result of these marches, and Leonardo and Marta Lorena Casco is the name of the couple. And so when Leonardo finished his studies at American University, they went back to Honduras, and we always stayed in touch. And many years later, then I was bishop in the Virgin Islands, and they called me up and they said, "Oh, Padre Sean, what are we going to do? They're passing legislation here to legalize abortion." And they said, "And it's just been approved." And I said, "Well, how long until it goes into effect?" And they said, like 3 months. And I said, "We have 3 months to change it."
Wow.
And
okay. Huh.
so I said, get your friends, start working on doing op-eds for the newspapers, try and get on the radio and the television.
And this was 1996, right? 96?
Yeah, it was around then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I said, I'll raise money in the States to pay for the advertising.
Okay.
And I don't know, something just occurred to me to call Dr. Nathanson, and I said, would you be willing to come with me to Honduras? And he said, oh, yes, Bishop. He said, as a matter of fact, I've just done this film, Silent Scream, and we've just translated it into Spanish.
Oh, I didn't realize it was translated.
Yeah.
Okay, because he did that film in '84.
Okay, well, that's when, yeah. Oh, yes, it would have been in the 80s, because I
Okay.
was already bishop in the Virgin Islands at the time.
Got it. Okay.
So I said, I explained to him what had happened, and he said, yes, I'll go with you. And so we went, and we put him on television there. We had him talk to the medical school. We had a youth rally at one of the big auditoriums.
Yeah. And did people show up?
Oh, yes, people showed up. And we
Okay.
had him talk on the radio. We had him
Good.
interviewed. We put, had a silent scream shown everywhere.
Awesome. That's
And
awesome.
and the legislation was changed.
That's great. That's great.
And
And it's the power of story. So what do you recall what he shared? Was he going over more medical, like anatomy and
oh no, well, no, he
physiology,
talked
or
about his own journey.
his journey of
to-
conversion? Okay.
Well, it was a conversion to life. He was
right.
not yet
Right.
embraced Catholicism, but he was, and it was very interesting because Marta Lorena, when she saw him off, she gave him a little crucifix. And years later, when I was at another meeting with him in Venezuela, he pulled the crucifix out of his pocket.
Oh.
And I said, wow. I said, well, this. And he said, thank you for taking me to Honduras. He says, I only have one regret. I said, what's that? He said, that I didn't take my wife with me to meet all those people.
Oh gosh. Oh, okay. Wow.